Boa noite. Good night, everybody. Welcome to the Teacher Development Seminar. I'm Andrea Aracaki, the Managing Director of Education First EF in Brazil. And it's our honor to have such a special group together this evening. And today we will have the chance to learn and exchange ideas about oral communication skills and bilingualism. This year, EF Education First celebrates its 5th anniversary, and it's a very special year for us, as we celebrate having opened the world through education since 1965, and inspiring more and more our students to break the cultural and language barriers that keep us apart. But this journey starts with you, the English teachers. We know how big the opportunity is to have more Brazilians each year speaking a second language. But with combined effort of all of you, we can contribute to this development with an experience abroad. EF has 42 language schools in 16 countries and 7 different languages. We have thousands of teachers, and we've trained teachers from all over the world in the teacher training programs in our language schools abroad. I invite you to learn more about what EF can provide for you and how you can grow with us. In the Resource for Educators brochure you received today in your bag. And there is a surprise for you tonight. We will give away a 1-week teacher training course at one of our schools to one of you. And now I invite Luciano Tim, our Director of Institutional Relations and Academics in Brazil, to talk about our agenda for this evening and introduce to you to our special speakers this evening. Welcome again and enjoy.
Thank you once more for being here. And just the fact that we have an audience which is so interested in developing language and developing teachers and being here as a representative of your area of education makes us very, very happy. I'm honored to introduce Dr. Beata, which I will read her bio in a minute. We are now starting the second part of our agenda, which will be held by Dr. Beata. And after that, we have a quick coffee break. And we come together again in order to discuss bilingualism. That event would then end with a short cocktail as well. So thanks once more for being here. Let me quickly introduce Dr. Beata, which for the last 25 years has been studying and helping teachers to develop their skills in classrooms. Dr. Beata holds a PhD and master's degree in linguistics from Brown University in the US. And besides her interest in developing teachers, she also has a particular will to host students from around the world at her home in Boston, where she's based. Her German-Swedish background makes her a native bilingual. So I want you all to welcome Dr. Beata Smith for our event.
Oh boy, too many things. No? That way? That way. Okay. Well, good evening. Thank you all for making it here tonight after, I'm sure, a long work day. I will do my best to keep you engaged. I won't say entertained, but engaged. And see if I can make you think a little bit more about oral assessment. It does sound a bit dry, but I want you to know that it's not going to be dry. It's really, I'm going to make you think. You're going to be doing a lot of work. I already know about this topic, so I'm going to make you do the work. It's convenient, isn't it? So we're talking about oral communication skills, assessing oral communication skills in the classroom on an ongoing basis. What do I mean by that? Well, I can tell you what I not mean by that, what I don't mean by that. I don't mean the type of oral assessment that happens in a Cambridge test or in a TOEFL test. We're not talking about formal assessment. We're talking about informal assessment every day in the classroom. So that's what we're talking about tonight. And hopefully it will be practical, something for you to go away with and perhaps use sometime in your next classes. As Luciano said, my passion is teacher training, and that's what I spend my summers doing. My winters, I spend supporting our own teachers in our English-speaking schools, and also sometimes in our other languages. So, well, this is just the agenda, not very interesting. Let us talk about you. So let me find out who's here today. Who teaches in elementary? Elementary? Young school? Young kids? Yeah. All right. Middle? Sort of teenagers? Young? Yeah. Okay. High school? Yes. All of those? Sometimes that is the case, yes. University? Okay. And adults, adult ed? Oh, wow, quite a few of you. Okay, great. Very nice. Now, if you haven't met your neighbor yet, this is a good time to meet your neighbor because you're going to be talking to your neighbor. So if you don't have a neighbor, you need to find one. And I would like you to discuss what I have up there. So how do you teach? What would you call your methodology? What does your classroom look like? What is happening in your classroom in a normal lesson? Okay, so let's take a couple minutes to do that. All right? Okay, thank you. This is only the beginning. You'll get to talk more later. So let me hear a few things that you talked about. So what would you call your methodology? Anybody, shout it out. What would you call your methodology? Communicative, yes. Anybody not using the communicative approach? It's okay. You know, when I started out, I was grammar translation all the way, but I'm old, so no longer. Both. And a mix, right? Many times we call it we give it a very fancy name. We call it the eclectic method. That means a little bit of everything. But I would agree with the gentleman over there that communicative is probably the most popular approach, at least in Brazil. And I've been here before, so I've had this conversation before.
I would say that communicative approaches were used in courses.
In course, not in public schools. Then we're talking about, yeah, in private as well.
Of course, we have schools that use communicative approach, but not all.
Aha. So what do they use instead?
Translation.
Grammar translation.
Especially because of the amount of students in the classroom.
Yeah, that can be a difficult thing.
And
Yep.
because we have a name, we have to see which grade you have a name, and then we have to teach the students to translate well.
Right. Right.
It's very difficult. Well, I'm talking about my school, the school where I work. When you asked that.
Right.
What about their name? Since the beginners.
Okay. Let's say, though, that in an ideal world, we would like to use the communicative approach, right? And we try from time to time, we will slip it in when our headmaster isn't looking or whatever, because we know as language teachers that it does work. That really, if you want students to communicate and not recite the grammar and not just translate, then you have to use a different approach. We know that. So, what happens in those communicative classrooms, those ideal communicative classrooms? What happens there?
I think most of the people walk.
Does he?
Yeah.
She?
I mean,
Uh-huh.
students don't like to talk when they don't know what to do.
They don't know. Do you all agree with that? Is that is that the sense of a communicative classroom? The teacher talks?
We talk more than we
Yes, teachers usually talk more than they have to. That is a common disease that we have. That is absolutely true. Ideally, though, is that the idea? No. See, you all know what the idea is. The idea is what? Have students talk. Yes.
If we don't do it, there's no class. Huh?
But it's all in the, I don't
A
know.
little bit.
We seem to succeed pretty well at EF. We actually make them talk from A1 and up. So, and that's why I started to get into this, because the million-dollar question is, if you are teaching in a communicative classroom, is this: how do you assess your students' oral activities on an ongoing basis? Of course, if you're doing grammar translation, it's much easier. You just give them a written test. But you have no idea if they can communicate in English, right? So let's again imagine our ideal classroom, which is communicative. How do we assess students? Any thoughts on that? Have a chat with your neighbor. In a communicative classroom, how would you assess students? Okay, thank you. So how about that assessment? How do you assess students? Any thoughts on that?
Try to see if they are able to form sentences or to communicate in a way that I can understand, or that they can understood by someone.
Seeing if you can understand them. That's a good measure, and we will come back to that actually. Do you do it? Do you write down anything that you're hearing, or no? Just impressions. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Thoughts on assessing them when they're doing communicative activities?
Well, they're achieving the goal, which is communicating.
Mhm.
Well, it can be different levels.
Yeah.
Issues, of course. But if they are like reaching the goal,
Are they reaching the goal? And you're setting the goals.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, if they want to buy something in a supermarket, for
Mhm.
example, even if they are not like using the proper grammar, but they are doing the right thing,
Mhm.
using the language properly, people can understand that.
Yep. They're managing to buy the stuff.
Yeah.
That
I mean,
then
of
they
course, can
succeeded.
receive some feedback.
Yeah, yeah.
But
That's another thought. Yeah, let's keep that thought. Okay, so I got interested in this because we are a thoroughly communicative classroom. All of our schools embrace the communicative methodology, and we really do use it. We are a private school system, so we don't have a state exam sort of sitting in the background that we need to meet. But we do prepare students for multiple international exams. So it's not that we don't think about exams. But most of those international exams these days actually test communicative skills. So it's high time for most countries, I think, to step up to the plate and become a little more communicative, because that's where we really want to get with this, isn't it? So I got interested because we are task-based and communicative, and I was watching teachers do a lot of what I call endless, aimless presentations. This is one of the things that teachers love to do, right? Yeah, I give you a topic and you can present on it. Yay, because then I, as a teacher, don't have to do anything, right? The students are doing all the work. Well, these presentations were driving me crazy because I did not see anybody evaluating the students on those presentations, even though presentations are probably the easiest thing to evaluate. We'll get there in a minute. We are accredited by various accrediting bodies around the world. And our school in Malta, Malta is an English-speaking island, by the way, in case you didn't know that. Our school in Malta is accredited by a European body called Equals. And the Equals inspectors were telling us that our classrooms were wonderfully communicative. We were really giving students lots of opportunities to communicate, but we were not evaluating that communication. So that then made me go back and start thinking about how can we evaluate the communication that goes on in the classroom. So that's how I ended up with this topic. They were saying, also the inspectors were saying, what is the message we're sending students? We're sending the student the message that everything written is important. If you write an essay, if you write a test, that's important, we grade that. But we don't grade anything oral. What kind of a message is that in a communicative environment, right? So those are our thoughts to get to this topic, really. And of course, we are working continuously towards students taking increasing responsibility for their learning. So this is all part of that. All right, so let's move along and see if this wants to move along with me. Yes? Okay, so again, let's envision our ideal communicative classroom. And with your partner, with your neighbor, just brainstorm a few types of oral activities that you do in the classroom. Yeah, 2 minutes. Okay, thank you. It's a good thing I have a microphone. That is, we're teaching this as we would our class. Yeah. All right, thank you very much. So let's hear let's hear a couple of different oral communication activities that you do in the classroom. Let's hear them. What types of things do you do? Find someone who. Yes, excellent. Find someone who. That's good. He has a good teacher voice. We can hear him. We can hear him. You all need to use your teacher voices.
Depending on the level of the students, we can have also debate.
Debates? Yeah.
If we provide opinion gaps.
Yes.
Otherwise, there's no debate.
Yes. There has to be a discussion of some sort. Yep. What else? Oral activities? TED Talks. And what do you have them do with that?
I start asking questions like kind of directing the conversation
Mhm.
and asking them to answer. And
Mhm.
from that, I develop the subject with them, and then we go through the test
Okay.
and check.
So
what
question
can
and
be done.
answer,
Exactly.
more or less. Uh-huh. Okay. What else?
And also, depending on what we want them to practice, we can have a student interview another student, a student interview another one, and then he will have to gather another students to report what he found out about the previous one.
Uh-huh. Yes. Okay. So an interview situation, more or less, yeah? Except that you're reporting back from the interview. Yep. All right. Well, there are many different things that we can do. Here are some of the ones that I came up with. Interviews, discussions, debates. We had information gap activities, presentations, skits, role plays, simulations. Yes, you've seen these before. Nothing strange there. But then I come back to my question from the beginning. How will we assess those activities? How will we evaluate them? Well, let's just have that sit there. Of course, we can do it informally. We can just listen in and say, oh yeah, he got it and she didn't get it yet. Yeah. Or we can be a little bit more formal. I'm going to look at a sort of semi-formal way of assessing it. Because, again, remember, I want to send a message to the student that the oral work is as important as the written work. That's what we're trying to do here. So let's perhaps define assessment. How would you define assessment? Just shout it out. What's assessment? Yes, but how would you, what is it? How do you define it?
Well, I teach business people. So if they cannot communicate and if they cannot call the United States branch and say, hey, here we have a problem, let's solve it, I know that student is not able to communicate. So
Right.
what I do is I get back to him or her and we do it all over again. I do a lot of role plays and presentations and
Okay, so you
I
do
train,
all of
I
those
train
things.
business people.
So you do all of that,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
But
Basically.
what is assessment? I'm looking for a definition. A measure, yeah?
Evaluating the most basic ways to say if something's good or not.
If it's good or not, yes. And I think you said before if they met the goal or not, if they achieved what they were supposed to achieve, yeah?
Are students using the structure that they were taught before?
Aha, that's part of it too. Certainly with oral work too. Are they using the structures that they were taught?
And another point, are students using the structures according to the level they are? Because sometimes they are in an advanced level, but they are using basic structures.
Yes.
So
That's actually a very sophisticated thought right there. Yeah. So it's all of these things. Measuring proficiency and achievement. Did they achieve it? Are they proficient at the level that they should be proficient at? Or are they using very basic language even though they're B2 or something? Yeah. It's a way for you, of course, to diagnose if they're difficult, haven't done what you have taught them, if they can't quite do that yet. So helping us as teachers evaluate whether our lessons have been effective is part of it as well. Features of good assessment, sorry about word slipping over there. Features of good assessment tend to be practicality. Is it practical? We don't want a complicated assessment because then we're not going to do it, and we'll come back to that. We want it to be reliable. Can we do it several times and it will bring us the same results? And we want it to be valid. So what are our actual measures? Are these valid measures? Are we measuring something that is worth something? Yep, so that was our sort of working definition. We could make it more complicated, but we're not going to. Now, when I started to get into this topic, I did a lot of research on oral assessment, and the overwhelming opinions of everyone who has ever thought about this is that it is the most difficult skill to assess. It's much more difficult, it's much easier, I should say, it's much easier to assess writing. You know, you grade the essay and that's that. Listening, well, either they get it or they don't. But speaking is hard. So the way we address that as qualified professionals is we ignore it, right? So we don't assess the students when they're doing written work because it is too hard. At least we're not doing it in a formal or semi-formal way. So one of the issues why people are avoiding assessing oral work is because we don't know exactly what we are assessing. It could be all those things. It could be pronunciation. It could be spoken grammar. It could be vocabulary. It could be speech acts. Are they responding well to each other? That sort of thing. Is it accuracy? Is it fluency? Is it a global or a detailed assessment? And is it subjective or objective? All right, so we don't do it because it's much easier. Then we avoid all of these problems, right? But that's not going to help our students. So that's why I kept thinking about this. But we're in good company. Nobody does it really well, except maybe the Cambridge exam. Most schools have a proficiency scale. It can be anything. I'm using the Common European Framework because that's what we use. It's not because we're Eurocentric, as an American told me once. It's because the Common European Framework is used in a lot of places in the world, and most people know what it is. It's a 6-level scale. Most people here have heard of the Common European Framework. Goes from A1 to A2, B1, B2, C1, C2. And the good thing about this scale, what I like about it is that they have worked on so many aspects of it, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you look at their scales, it can really help you. So I looked at what they call their global oral assessment scale. And here's B1, for example. Has to be differentiated according to levels, can keep going comprehensively even though pausing for grammatical and lexical planning, and repair may be very evident. Can link discrete simple element into connected sequence to give straightforward descriptions on a variety of familiar subjects within his or her field of interest. reasonably accurate use of main repertoire associated with more predictable situations. So that's what the Common European Framework says students can do orally at B1. Now, they go one step further. And actually, so you don't have to scribble furiously, there is a handout in your pack. And if you want to take that out, you can kind of follow along on these scales because this is a lot of information. So this particular one that you see up there is on the first page, I believe. Yep. It should be the second picture on the first page. Yeah, it's there twice, I think. So what you can see there is that the Common European Framework differentiates for oral skills range, accuracy, fluency, interaction, and coherence. I'm not saying that this is the way we must do it. I'm just saying this is one way of doing it. And it's by using this scale, I didn't have to make up any of these criteria. So it saved a lot of work that way. So you can look at what these individual areas mean. Range means the student has enough language to get by with sufficient vocabulary to express him or herself with some hesitation, and circumlocutions on topics such as family, hobbies, interest, work, travel, current events. So very sort of common topics. Accuracy uses reasonably accurately a repertoire of frequently used routines and patterns associated with more predictable situations. Fluency can keep going comprehensibly, even though there's some pausing and so on. Interaction can maintain and close simple face-to-face conversation on topics that are familiar or of personal interest. And finally, coherence can link a series of shorter, discrete, simple elements into a connected linear sequence of points. Now, how on earth are we going to use that to evaluate what students are doing in the classroom? And that's what people that are using the Common European Framework want us to do. They want us to use those criteria to measure what our students can do orally. And actually, coincidentally, how many of you use the Cambridge exams or prepare students for the Cambridge exams? It's all in there. That's all part of the oral. So you've probably seen these before. So it is very much at the forefront of people's thinking. So let's try this out. And this is just for me to prove to you that this is actually difficult. Every group that I have done this with, they have, after a while, they've said, this is really hard. Yes, and that's why nobody does it, because it is hard. But let's give it a go. So we are actually going to think about a specific task, because you have to think about it in terms of what you really want the students to do. We're talking B1, so we're just going to stay with this scale. We're not going to make things more complicated. The task that students have is to create and perform skits or role play on cultural mistakes. Students are asked to choose a culture they know well and to brainstorm bad manners or cultural mistakes in the following situations. Choose one: public transportation, restaurant, or party. So the task is to make a skit that describes cultural mistakes, bad manners in a situation, one of these three situations, okay? And using the criteria, we're going to try to figure out the assessment, okay? I know, it's difficult. I'm not saying it's easy. So you have this as one of your handouts. So see, I'm going to show you the task again in a minute to remind you, but see if you can fill in the range that you think students should have to do this particular task, the accuracy, the fluency, the interaction, and the coherence. See if you can figure out what should go on those lines. And there are no right or wrong answers. We're trying to figure this out along the lines. I have some ideas, but I want to hear your ideas. So with your partners, see if you can figure it out. Put it back on the task since you have this in front of you. Oops. So here's the, no, sorry, that was not it. Yep. Here's the task. Okay? Clear? Yes? Your job to figure out range, accuracy, all of that. All right?
Você pega o seu HD.
Okay, thank you. I have to commend you. You're really giving it your very best. Thank you. I know this is hard, but you've really tried to follow along and to do this. So some of you were very clever and you went a page further in your handout and you saw that there were answers there. But those of you who didn't, well done. You tried on your own, so that was really good. So this is what I put. Answer. Some of you may have other answers that are just as good. So for range, I put small talk phrases, apologizing, thanking someone, asking permission, asking for something. I was keeping it very general because it could be any of those three situations. The next one, I copied a lot of what they had already because I thought it was difficult. Repertoire of frequently used phrases such as the ones described under range. Excuse me, I'm sorry, why don't you, I wonder if. Yeah, so now we're talking more about the sort of standard phrases. For the fluency, can keep going comprehensively. That's fluency, just can keep going and doesn't keep stumbling, yeah? But some of you may have put better things in there. And then for interaction, I put can confirm mutual understanding regarding good or bad behavior. Again, I was keeping it very general. I know some of you worked with very specific situations and you got a little more specific, which is absolutely fine if that is what you're testing. And then coherence, as the gentleman up here was saying, coherence is the hardest one. So I kind of copped out and I said, to describe what happened in the skit. That's not really the best answer, I'm sure. Does anyone have a better idea for coherence? If it makes sense, yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. So it has to make sense. Yeah, why not? That's a good measure. Does it make sense? Yeah. So that the whole skit makes sense, the situation makes sense. It's indeed a bad manners, good manners type situation. Does it make sense? Why not? I like it. I like it simple. Yeah. All right. So as the lady over there was saying, this is hard. And that's what I was telling you. It is hard. So when I ask my teachers to do this sort of thing, they typically will tell me, well, it's a skit, it's a presentation, so I'm going to use my presentation rubric, which I already have, and you have it on your handout as well, on page 2, I believe. Yeah, right there, right there. No, that one there, yeah. So you have both pages on the same page, which is more convenient than what I can do here. So this is typically what my teachers will do when I ask them to do this. They won't use the Common European Framework because it's too complicated. They will do this. They will evaluate students on information and topic. The group presented interesting information. 3, 2, 1, 0. Yeah? Organization. The skit was well organized and presented information in a logical way. some of these coincide with some of the criteria, actually. This could be coherence, if you like. So they do, but it's a much more holistic evaluation. And then the next ones are preparation, the visual aids, and so on. And the presentation itself, the skit was engaging and well received by the class. The presenter spoke clearly and fluently, and the presenters used good gestures and eye contact. So some of those are actually go beyond what the Common European Frame does, but not quite. And then finally, interaction and involvement. That's one that coincides the best with what we did before. The presenters got us involved in the presentation. We learned something new. And we could add what you were saying, it made sense. So we could add that as well. So that would be a holistic way of evaluating a presentation. It has a major flaw. So you have it in front of you. What's the flaw? What's the problem? Evaluating. Okay, we could probably specify it, but it is a group evaluation rather than individuals, yeah. But we could probably, there's another more serious flaw. If we think back at the Common European Framework and that what they were doing. Your handout, it might spring out at you. What is missing? Well, it's got all this good stuff: information, organization, preparation, presentation, interaction and involvement, and it is missing. Fluency, accuracy, range is missing. Fluency could possibly be in clearly and fluently, right? Could be the D there. But range is not there. There's no language. That's the basic problem with this type of holistic evaluation. And that's the most common one that people do. We have not evaluated the language. Did the students actually use the language that we have been preparing for the whole week? We've worked on this language, and we don't know. All we know is we know a lot about the content of the presentation and how it was presented, but we don't know anything about the language. So in terms of the Common European Framework, we've actually failed our assignment with this type, yeah? Mind you, this is better than nothing. This is better than not evaluating a presentation at all, but it does not evaluate the language. So that is one of the flaws. Okay, well, I don't want to make you work too hard, but it is, of course, a way to keep us going here. So language was missing, and any reference to those criteria that we had there. Okay. One way to do this, by the way, as a group would be to put it in a grid like that. It's just a format thing. I haven't really added any information. It's the same information as before, but we have the opportunity here to look at 4 students at a time, so we can make little comments under each student, so we can evaluate a group at a time. And I think that's what you were referring to earlier. So there is a way to amend this. Yeah? All right. So now that you've tried this out, what is your feedback? Oh, go ahead. I'm used to hearing that this is really hard. And why are you making us do this? So what is your immediate sort of feedback? Are you going to? There is no way?
Not in my case.
Not in your case?
Yeah.
But you can evaluate what they have done in class.
Well, yeah.
I mean, that is what you're evaluating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But not formally, I'd say.
Not formally.
in my
Too
case.
difficult to
In
do
my
it
case,
formally.
Yeah.
Other comments?
On just one activity
Mm-hmm.
or just one class?
No.
How it's gonna be during the month, the semester, whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're going to perhaps pick out certain activities. You can't do it all the time because it's much too time consuming. So maybe you decide to do it once a month, once a week, once every other week, I don't know. But you can't do it every time because it's very time consuming. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other comments? No, I'll tell you what my teachers said. They're much tougher on me than you are. So they were saying, well, thank you. It made me think about the CFR criteria, but it's too difficult to use. Okay, that was fine. I took that because I wanted them to think about the Common European Framework criteria. Some of them said it was okay for the teacher, but it was too difficult for students to use on each other. We do want students to assess each other as well. No way they can use this. Much too complicated. So that's true. And then the last comment that I heard and that I kind of picked up on was the teachers were saying, I wish that suggested assessment schemes were included with the activities in the textbooks. So the last time I gave this presentation, it was actually a joint event with Oxford University Press. And so I was able to say to the editors in the room, I said, take notice, you know, if you make all these communicative activities, you better put something in the teacher's book how you want teachers to evaluate that. I actually think that's a really relevant comment because it is very difficult to do this yourself. We've just tried it out. It takes time. We're all experienced, but it's still difficult for us to do this. So if you're teaching, you know, 25 hours a week, there's no way you're going to come up with a scheme. Like you said, you can't do this every day. So it would be really helpful if the textbook authors actually came up with the schemes. Then you wouldn't have to think so hard about this. So that was some of the feedback that we had. Let's talk about other forms of assessment because I really want you to go home and kind of feel that you've thought a little bit about assessment. So one type of assessment that we try to get students to do is self-assessment or reflection. We'll talk about that in a minute. You would want students to have input on some of the schemes, the assessment schemes that you have. So you can have students come up with the schemes if you give them some guidance. And we'll see if we have time to do that actually. You could have an interview grid. Interviewing is one of the most common things we do, right? Talk to your neighbor about so-and-so and then report back. Well, we're going to have to figure out some way to evaluate that because we're spending an awful lot of time with students interviewing each other. So I'll show you what my thoughts were on that. And then maybe, we said earlier that maybe we are actually evaluating pronunciation. In that case, we may need to evaluate it differently again. Maybe we are evaluating a short speech, very short speech, students reciting some movie quotes. Really, we're just talking about pronunciation here. Maybe they're performing a rap song, maybe they're reading a phone message to somebody, or maybe they're even reading aloud. Not my favorite activity, but it might work for pronunciation. So, for reflection, you could do something very simple like this. Just have the student think about what I did well on, what I didn't do well, what I need to work on, how I will work on it, and what I've learned and specific language I have used. So we do want to come back to the language here, yeah? So that would be one format for self-evaluation for students. And that is something that we want to try to encourage them to evaluate themselves. Okay, let's see. Let's see if we can make another grid. And you have that on your handout. This time, we're going to try to figure out what we're going to evaluate students on again. You can follow the range and all of that if you want to, or you could just follow any old scheme that you want to. So this is your evaluation grid that you have somewhere. And this is the task. Again, you're not doing the task. I know as teachers, we sort of tend to want to do the task. You're not doing the task. You're coming up with the evaluation for the task, okay? So this is the task. You are going, this the students' task. The students are going to present an award for the best movie of all times. In groups of 3, decide on a movie and complete the information for the movie that you have selected. Name of the movie, what is it about, when and where was it made, who directed, who acted, were there any awards given for this movie, reasons why this movie is the best of all times, and then present your award-winning movie to the class. The best picture of all times is, the movie is about, the first reason, blah, 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 okay? So that is the task. So the students are doing kind of an Oscar presentation, yeah? That's what they're doing. So again, it's a presentation. And what I would like you to think about is, how can you help students write their own evaluation of this? So this is not the teacher's evaluation, but this is students evaluating each other. So that's what you're going to put on the grid. Some criteria that you think that the students could work with. Okay, so we're sort of bringing it down a notch to a level that the students could handle. Yeah? So have a think with your partner. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, I take it as a good sign that you want to keep talking about this, so that's good. So here's your assessment grid. So up here, what are some of the things that we should evaluate students on for this particular task? What were some of the ideas that you came up with? Listening comprehensions?
Yes.
So how would you evaluate that?
If they could answer those questions that were raised accordingly, so that would be a good way to evaluate. If they should know,
Okay. So you would give them a little questionnaire. So whether they understood.
like that, yes,
Uh-huh.
whether they understood, so that they could tell me a little bit, at least the main information.
Okay. Okay.
Then the other one would be fluency.
Fluency.
Yes, if they, by giving me that kind of information, they
In a
were-
fluent.
yes,
Mhm. Yeah.
and of course coherent.
Uh-huh.
So basically, they should be able to make summary
Yeah.
by giving the first part what they saw, then supporting it, and then giving it to the conclusion. That will be for me
Coherence.
done.
Those would be
Yes,
the, okay.
yes.
And again, we were trying to give this grid over to the students so that they could write a peer evaluation. Do you think the students could do that?
Listening comprehension, I
Yes.
think so.
Yeah.
Overall understanding,
Yeah.
ability to summarize, if they were able to summarize, and by reasoning, that
Yeah,
would be
you
the
think
topics.
Your students could do
Yes.
it. Okay, great. Any other ideas?
We call these range, the ability to answer all the questions.
Uh-huh.
Like, you are presenting and I am your fellow student.
Mm-hmm.
Did you talk about all the topics? That's
Uh-huh.
true.
Okay.
And I go check.
Yeah.
All these range.
Okay. So maybe for the students, though, we wouldn't call it range. We know it's range, but we would say, did he cover all the topics? Yeah. So that would be one way to evaluate it. Yeah. Anything else?
We thought on vocabulary.
Vocabulary. Did they use the movie vocabulary that we've been practicing all week, right? Yes, we would want that up there. Yeah.
And then we thought about interaction.
Inter.
Like, does he present well with mutual understanding? Can I, as a student, understand what he's saying?
Very good.
And
Yes.
then we came up with structure. Like, could he use the structure we talked before?
Uh-huh.
We were thinking about if we are doing these tests. Probably we taught them passive voice.
Uh-huh.
Some sessions.
Or superlatives, comparatives. Comparatives.
Then I go thinking as a student, if my fellow student is using
Yeah. Very nice. Very nice. Good. Well done. Well done. This is not easy, but you did really well. So thank you. Yeah. So you're getting the hang of it, right? It is, once you start thinking about it, it's not that complicated anymore. But this one was a little different because we tried to bring it down to the student level. What can the students evaluate each other on? But I think the two examples that we heard were really nice. Thank you. That was about student assessment, so peer assessment. So let's go back to where we were before. I had given you this whole list of different things, right? So here's an interview assessment grid that I came up with. Now you don't have to do anything anymore. You just have to listen. So I'm not going to make you do any more work. It's late. So in this case, I just did it very simply. We have the aims of the lesson, of course, the language and so on that I want the students to use. And the criteria were the students asked each other questions and answered them. The students listened to each other. That would be the interaction part. The students responded appropriately. Yeah, coherence and interaction. There was appropriate turn taking, and students used the specific language taught previously, for example. So that would be range. Yeah. So again, you can lead these back to the Common European Framework ones. Didn't call it that. I made it a little bit simpler. But this one also allows me to look at two students at the same time. So I'm looking at student A and B who are interviewing each other, and I'm saying yes, and maybe I'm putting some examples in there sometimes and not very often. It's just a suggestion for an interview scheme. But this was one that really bugged me because I saw so many interviews going on in the classroom and I saw no evaluation whatsoever. So I was trying to come up with something. Of course, as you walk around the class, you'll need one for every pair, one piece of paper for every pair. So there are all kinds of practical challenges here. All right. Then we have pronunciation. So this one is a little bit different again. So that was just a couple of ideas. We actually let students use their phones sometimes. I know this is a big debate among teachers. Should we let them use their phones or not? We also have iPads in our classroom, but if you don't have iPads, students can use their personal phones to record themselves, and they're usually quite willing to do so. So it works as a recording device. So one task that we did was students can record a real message on their phone in the target language, in English, and then you can pass the phone around and they can listen to each other, so they can actually evaluate each other's pronunciation. I'm a phonologist by training, so I like these sorts of activities because I want students to sound good. I think it helps to sound good, helps comprehension. So then students are rating each other basically as they pass the phone around. And they can rate each other on some of these criteria, which you also have on your handout. And here the criteria are: how much can you understand, and fluency in pronunciation. So very narrow. We're not talking really about content, even though the content has to be comprehensible as well, but we're talking about pronunciation. So I can't understand the speaker in English at all. I can't understand the basic message, just individual words. I can understand the basic ideas, some pronunciation problems. I can understand ideas pretty well, a few pronunciation errors, and I can understand the speech very well, very few errors. So that would be the overall comprehension. And then the fluency and pronunciation, the speech is very slow, the message is not understandable. Flow is a little better, pronunciation is still very difficult to understand, many repetitions. Speech is slow but fluent, still too many pauses, still some mispronunciation, and speech is fluent with good speed, only a few mispronunciations, and speech is very good with no mispronunciations. One way to evaluate pronunciation. But you see, it gets much more complicated than just good or bad, yeah? And I think it has to be in order to be useful feedback for the students. Okay, so that was pronunciation. So, we've almost come to the end here. So, a couple of things, though, that we have to think about when we evaluate students in the classroom. There are time constraints. We cannot do this every day, all the time, but we still should remember that we have to send the message to students that the oral work is important. And the only way you do this is by visibly evaluating them while they're doing oral work. Our tasks are usually practical real-life situations, so you want to evaluate them on practical real-life things. Tell them what they're being evaluated on. If you can, have them contribute to the evaluation criteria. That will make them much more motivated. Think about it. Can you duplicate these results under different circumstances or with different group of students? And how are you going to record what you have done? How are you going to keep this information? How is this going to feed into the students' grades or the students' overall evaluation? So, don't lose the piece of paper that you did all this on. And if you're working in a system where there are many teachers, how are we going to make sure that teachers are consistent? Yeah, that what I think is great, another teacher doesn't think is horrible. Now that is a real challenge. So we haven't even gone there yet. So you see, oral evaluation is difficult. So we're back where we were at the beginning. I do want to press this on. If you have any textbook writers among your friends, it would really help if teachers could get some help here. Usually, of course, you start with the objectives and the specific language points. So don't forget the language. The language is the important thing. And don't start with a cool activity and try to retrofit the assessment. Think about what it is you want to assess first. And don't skip the assessment. That's what we see most commonly. So you have the references, and I used the Brown, The New Ways of Classroom Assessment is a really helpful, very practical book that is made by teachers for teachers, very, very useful. The other one is much more theoretical. And then if you need any information about the Common European Framework reference, it's there. So just one last comment about our webinars. Right now we have, we're in a series of 6 webinars that we're doing. They're completely free. The next one is on Thursday. That's 2 days from now, isn't it? And that is in your time zone, 11 and 2 p.m. And this one, oh, I can't remember what it's about. I should have put that down as well. Anybody else in the back there remember? We've done reading, we've done modern trends. I think this one might be about listening, if I'm not mistaken. We've done writing as well. So very sort of hands-on, practical, 1 hour, totally free. And if you do all of them, you get a nice little certificate. You can also find out more about our teacher training courses, where we do things like we did here today. And we also have a free standardized test online that you can find out more about. Any questions about what we did today? Oh, great. I don't know, Luciano. When is the next one?
So
You have to go online on Thursday. That would be the next one.
So thank you very much. This session. So stay here with me. You are all invited for a 15 minutes break. There are some delights upstairs. The meat fillet is my favorite one. Have a go. We should be back in no longer than 15 minutes from now. Upon return, we will actually hijack your name tags just for the teacher training course abroad. It will be given back afterwards, just so you don't need to fill out anything else. So please join us on the second floor where we were before. Thank you.
And come back for a nice discussion on bilingualism.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for.
Ela vai trazer a apresentação?
facilitates fall and We've explored continents. We've crossed oceans. We've seen kings fall and enemies rise. We've broken hearts. 1 million words, some of them are difficult. Hippopotamonstrosity equip. Explore continents. We've crossed oceans. We've seen kings fall. We've broken hearts. We have 1 million words. Some of them are difficult. Hippopotamonstrosity equip. The lion. Others are simple. We're always evolving. We have 1,000 ways to stay good.
Awesome.
It's grand. Beautiful.
I will invite everyone to take your seats.
We've explored continents.
We've crossed oceans.
We've seen kings fall and queens rise. We've broken hearts. We have 1 million words. Some of them are difficult.
Hippopotamonstrosity equip. The lion.
Others are simple. We're always evolving. We have 1,000 ways to stay good.
Awesome.
It's grand. Beautiful.
Splendid.
We trade in English. We greet in English. We read in English.
We travel in English.
We care in English.
We support in English.
We love English.
Oh, here's the round table. Yeah. Because I asked them when I arrived here, said, you invited me to a round table. I don't see the round table.
Let's wait the next elevator coming down and then think we are ready to start the second part of our night here. I hope you appreciated the first part, and I would like to thank Brastiso for this amazing 2.5 years partnership for many occasions and many events. Thank you, Claudia. Extend my compliments to Marcelo as well, of being such a dream partner that we have, and count on us for future events as well. Thank you. So the topic now is a general panorama about bilingualism in Brazil. And we have Marcelo taking a lead here in discussing this topic, together with Professor Antonietta and Professor Beata. Marcelo holds a PhD in linguistics from Unicamp and has a MA in applied linguistics and he does research in a second language acquisition and bilingualism, and teacher English linguistics at Unifesp. Antonieta Megali holds a Master Applied Linguistics from PUC São Paulo, and also is currently an English language coordinator at School Antonieta in Leon Pfeffer. That's right? Good. Thank you. Sorry. And currently is also researching data analysis at Coage, São Paulo. No? That's okay so far? Feel free to correct me, right? Without further errors in BIOS, I hand this session to all of you. Thank you so much for being here.
So I was invited to coordinate this, and it's very simple and easy to organize things with people that are intelligent and know what they have to do. So we're going to start with Megali. He's going to give you, I call her Megali. I avoid Antonieta for personal reasons. And she's going to start by telling you what the general panorama is. Then from that, I'm going to tell you about language acquisition. I'm going to talk about bilingualism, but from second language acquisition and language acquisition perspective. And then we'll pass the floor to Beata so that she can make final comments on that and tell us about her experience. We should be 15 minutes each, no longer than that. And then there will be no breaks in between the talks. And then towards the end, we're going to open up for questions and answers if there are any. Thank you. So I'll give you Megali now. Thank you.
Okay. No, yeah, better. So good evening, everybody. I would like to start by thanking you for inviting me to be here. In this 15-minute presentation, a very tiny presentation, I'll talk about bilingual education in Brazil, a brief scenario. I'm not talking about I'm not only talking about bilingual schools which teach in Portuguese and in English, but what I want to do here is to broaden your view on bilingual education. So I'll start by if we are talking about bilingual education, we are obviously talking about the languages in Brazil. So according to recent research, we have here in Brazil 180 indigenous languages, 40 languages of immigrants, 2 sign languages, Libras, and also Kapor, Brazilian Sign Language, which is from an indigenous community, African languages in the Quilombo communities and religious needs. And we also have English, which is being used as a means of instruction in many bilingual and international schools. When we talk about these languages, I'm not talking about people who are not Brazilian. I'm talking about Brazilian people who have these languages as their first language or as their second language, okay? So Brazil is a multilingual country. All those languages that I showed you are spoken by Brazilian people who were born in Brazil, according to many people who research in the area. So if Brazil is a multilingual country, oops, it's not easy, but I'll try hard and I'll make mistakes. Oops. Again. So this is walking through this block in a neighborhood in São Paulo. These are all the languages we can find in one block. Hebrew, Korean, Spanish, and Libras, okay? So why I'm showing you that? Because if we have all these languages, and of course, it depends on the area I am, I have more evidence evidence of these languages, why do we consider Brazil as a monolingual country? What makes we not consider all the other languages and think that the only language we speak in Brazil is Portuguese? And then I brought this quotation in Portuguese because I don't really like to translate quotations. And I do think everybody can understand. Can you? Okay, so either she can, but I can talk to her later. I like this quotation. It's from a professor, Gilvan Oliveira. And what he says is, não é por casualidade que se conhecem algumas línguas e se desconhecem outras. Conhecimento e desconhecimento são produzidos ativamente a partir de óticas ideológicas determinadas, construídas historicamente. No nosso caso, produziu-se o conhecimento de que no Brasil se fala o português, e o desconhecimento de que muitas outras línguas foram e são igualmente faladas. O fato de que as pessoas aceitem, sem discutir, como se fosse um fato natural que o português é a língua do Brasil, foi e é fundamental para obter consenso das maiorias para as políticas de repressão às outras línguas. Of course, if we talk about English in Brazil, it's kind of different. But even though we have to take into account that bilingual schools are registered at MEC together with the monolingual schools, which means that there is no law for bilingual schools. So if we know that there are so many languages in Brazil, what is the education in this multilingual country? So I'm going to show you some of the types of bilingual education which are being discussed here in Brazil nowadays. Bilingual education for deaf people. It has been recognized by law since 2005. And according to this law, deaf people should know Libras and Portuguese. This area of is producing lots of new studies and theoretical basis for research all over the world. Indigenous bilingual education has been recognized by law since 1993. There are 2,323 indigenous schools in Brazil. 163,773 indigenous students. So we are not talking about 5 schools in Acre, okay? 8,431 indigenous teachers, and from these schools, 78.26% of them are bilingual, which means that the students are taught in their native language and also in Portuguese. Bilingual education in multicultural contexts. There is this project which is called Projeto Escola Intercultural Bilíngue de Fronteiras, which was created in 2005. And the idea is that the schools in the border zone, they will have in common the development of program for intercultural education with emphasis on the teaching of Portuguese and Spanish. There is also UNILA. Have you ever heard of UNILA? UNILA is an university in Foz do Iguaçu. UNILA receives students from all over Latin America. 50% of students are Brazilians and the other countries. And the classes are taught in Portuguese and Spanish. So UNILA is a huge university, not huge, okay. I would like to be huge, but it's not. It's a big one, okay? And there are lots of courses and everybody can study there. Now Itaipu, half of the university is being constructed inside Itaipu. And there are also other schools, just like Jewish schools in Brazil, in which they are taught in Hebrew and also in Portuguese, and other examples. And then there is elite bilingual schools. Marcelo will talk mainly about the language taught in these schools. So elite bilingualism has been described as a privilege of middle class, well-educated members of most society. Many people don't like that we call this kind of bilingual school elite bilingual school, but if we think of our reality, it's really for people from upper classes. And then, as I've already said, different from the other types of bilingual education that I presented, there is no law. So if there is no law, many questions remain unanswered. How many bilingual schools are there in Brazil? Nobody knows. Mainly because as we don't know what a bilingual school is, anything can be bilingual, and bilingual sells a lot. It gives status. People want to have their kids studying in these schools. And then even if these schools are not bilingual, they like to call themselves bilingual because it will attract the students. What is the background needed by a teacher? I think Marcelo will talk a little bit about it. Okay. What kind of background does the teacher need? Letras, pedagogia, letras e pedagogia, and then I study letras and I take 1 year online course, pedagogia, and then I can teach in these schools. And then we have no law. If we have no law, okay, we like real problems. We want to listen to you. And then what kind of background? Should this teacher understand about acquisition, about bilingual education, about biliteracy? What kind of teacher should I hire? Do you have a quick problem, a question? 5 minutes. I'm in the very end. Okay, I thought I like problems, but okay, not that much. How many hours a week should English and Portuguese be taught? 50% of the classes are going to be taught in English and the other 50% in Portuguese, or should be only English in infant education? Each school has created its own model. How about the literacy process? Should I teach how to read and write in Portuguese or in English or all together at once? Nobody knows. And probably there isn't only one single answer. There are many kinds of bilingual education and many ways to do it. But I don't think there are so many ways as we have here in Brazil. And then that's it. It was only a brief scenario, so we can start thinking about bilingual education, okay? Thank you. Of course, you can ask questions later, but if you want to send me an email, I can also answer. You stay here, no.
Is this working? Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So I'll talk about bilingualism in Brazil, but my take is going to be second language acquisition, the acquisitional perspective of these schools. So as Megali pointed out, I'm going to talk about the elite bilingualism. And it's funny because every time I hear this term, I know it is elite bilingualism, but I never think of it as elite bilingualism. I'm so interested in the process of language acquisition that I end up forgetting that it's not happening all over the place. I keep thinking of those little tiny beings endowed with universal grammar who can actually develop into bilingual, little tiny bilingual creatures that speak 2 languages. So I end up forgetting that it's not a reality, but it's something that I work with a lot. So I'll be talking about that mainly. And towards the end, you're going to be allowed to ask any questions you have. So just following up on what Megali said, she said that anything could be a bilingual school. So I decided to take this definition of bilingual schools from a renowned researcher in the area so that you can see that anything actually, according to definition, could be a bilingual school. I'm going to read it out to you. Schools in the United Kingdom where half the school subjects are taught in English are called bilingual schools. Schools in Canada in which all the subjects are taught English to French Canadian children are called bilingual schools. Schools in the Soviet Union, when there was the Soviet Union, because this was written back in '82, in which all the subjects except Russian, in which all the subjects except Russian are taught in English, are bilingual schools, as are schools in which some of the subjects are taught in Georgian and the rest in Russian. Schools in the United States where English is taught as a second language are called bilingual schools, as are parochial schools and even weakened ethnic groups schools. Thus, the concept of bilingual school has been used without qualification to cover such a wide range of uses of two languages in the educational context. And this is pretty much what happens in Brazil. As Megali pointed out, we have schools that have 30 minutes of English every day and they call themselves bilingual because they want to attract parents that are interested in having their kids in bilingual schools. So yes, and no man's land. And usually what they teach in 30 minutes is vocabulary and songs, and then the teacher goes away because after 30 minutes, that's all you can do, right? So the program models that I would like to talk about are early total immersion. So as you can see over there, can you see the little red light? Okay, because it's so tiny. But there you have kindergarten. And I'm mostly talking about this reality because then you have grade 1, grade 2, and the schools seem to have a gradual immersion program. I am actually thinking about kindergarten, and I'm considering that a lot of the schools in São Paulo, and I'm considering the Paulistano reality here, they talk about kindergarten being 100% of the time in English, or they talk about 80% or 70% of the time in English. I honestly don't know how they calculate 70%. It remains to be answered. I have no idea. Some other delayed immersion programs, they start in kindergarten with very little. I'm talking about English, but consider that a foreign language if you're considering a different perspective on this, but I'm really considering English here. So kindergarten, and then grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and then successively you're going to have more and more English. That's one possibility. So as I mentioned earlier to you, I'm talking about total immersion in preschool. So the basic premises consider here are everybody who speaks 2 languages is a bilingual. You may grow up speaking 2 languages or learn your native language first and then a second language. There are many types of bilinguals, but the definitions hinge on simultaneous versus early acquisition and consecutive acquisition. The status, since we're talking about elite schools, I'm considering additive bilingualism. There is no case of subtractive bilingualism that I think Megali would be better suited to talk about, because this will be communities in which the language isn't really valued. Your native language isn't really valued, and the second language that you're learning is the valued one, so your first language is actually a little bit suppressed. That's not what happens with English in elite schools. So for acquisition to take place, we need input. We talk about bilingualism in terms of age of acquisition. So child bilingualism can be either simultaneous or consecutive. We have adult bilingualism and teenage bilingualism, which I'm not talking about here, because each one is a different area and deserves a lot of attention and research into. Okay, so I've decided to focus on one only. Then you have the different kinds of bilinguals that I mentioned earlier, because depending on the account that you give on acquisition, you're going to have simultaneous acquisition or consecutive acquisition. Focusing on input, which I mentioned earlier, simultaneous acquisition is all about picking up the language, not having to know consciously that you're using parts of speech or elements of grammar. And consecutive, which is late, usually when our kids go to school at the age of 11 or 10 or even 8, and then they start developing a second language, they know that they're developing a second language consciously. That's more like acquisition. And learning. Learning is about knowing that you're developing this language. And I'm not using crashing terms here, but I'm not going into that. So in terms of acquisition, input plus a baby should give you a native language. And input plus a speaker of a language will give you inner language, which is the language in constant development, the L2, the second language. We also consider role relationships, because usually when kids go to a bilingual school, they are in this context here. See, school, where you have role relationships. Are you the teacher, the student, the principal? Who are you at the school? And what kind of topic will be related to doing certain things at school? So you will learn as a bilingual from early on to do certain things in the language of the school and to do other things in the language spoken at home. Critical intervening factors that we should consider: age, the age at which the acquisition starts, type of context and exposure. Is it 30 minutes or is it 4 hours every day at school? Sense, value, and affect assigned to the languages. As I mentioned, in the case of English, we don't have to worry much about this because the language is pretty much valued and seen positively by the society. Language acquisition. The basic premise that I'm moving from here is that some structures are related. The child doesn't have to learn one structure at a time. When one is learned, a group of other structures follow naturally. It's pretty much like the child has to acquire a linguistic principle, and attached to this linguistic principle, there are a lot of structures that become available, either for comprehension or for production at a certain moment in their lives. They don't really have to learn each and every structure separately, which is something that our students in second language classes end up having to do. They learn one structure today, they have to learn how to use it in this context. If you think of the present perfect, for example, there are so many different uses and they all come in a different unit, and you have to help them master that. Considering aspects of first language acquisition, a child develops a language by being exposed to robust input in that language. This input, what I'm calling the input here, is everything the kid hears. This input contains the primary linguistic data. The primary linguistic data is the part of the input that the kid is exposed to. And by being exposed to this input, this specific input, they can determine what the characteristics of that particular language are. And they can start developing from that. For instance, if you're considering English and Portuguese, you are exposed to English as a kid and you understand that there is no possibility of having a missing subject in your sentence. It is raining, it is good, it is nice. Whereas in Portuguese, you don't need this it, it's invisible. That's a basic difference between the two languages. And that's one primary linguistic characteristic of Portuguese that the kids have to master in order for their Portuguese to develop. Okay, and a number of structures related to this phenomenon will follow suit. The primary linguistic data contains essential information from which the child will build the grammar of his or her language. This accounts for the linguistic explosion. You know, when kids go to bed one day, they wake up the next day and they're speaking a lot because it happens like that. And usually at the age of 3, 3.5, they're pretty fluent. And we struggle for 10, 15, 20 years, and we still face a structure that you look at and you say, huh, I didn't know you could say that. The magic is that the kids don't have to learn each and every structure separately. The foreign language learner, however, has to acquire these structures separately and one at a time usually. The feeling is that it never ends, and then you have to be orally assessed. The final attainment. If you compare the final state in language acquisition, in your L1, the speaker knows the language. In your L2, if you analyze yourselves today and where you stand in your continuum of second language development, the language is in constant development. You're constantly hearing things that you didn't know you could say. Okay, so comparing, as you can see here, in the L1, the speaker knows the language because they have a language faculty, the possibility to develop a language, and this develops in the context and exposed to the input and the primary linguistic data. It develops into your first language. This is the grammar of your L1. It's not about knowing vocabulary. It's about using the structure. In your native language, you go to school and the language that you're taught is quite different from the language you speak. You have to learn the rules and everything. And also you're learning a different code. You have to use graphic representations of what you say. That's your grammar 1 and your grammar 2, because the grammars are different. The grammar of spoken English, the spoken Portuguese, and the grammar of written Portuguese are quite different. And depending on the situation, you have to know if you should use this or that. That's part of knowing. This is learning another grammar inside your own grammar. In L2, you have the language faculty and you're exposed to this L1 and you develop your grammar 1, but you also have to develop your grammar of L2 in the same context. So in a way, it's like you're a bilingual in your native language. So being a bilingual is a natural condition of human beings. The difference is whether you're going to share the same structure and vocabulary and learn extra elements in your native language, or if you're developing 2 languages simultaneously. So there you have a little drawing that I have where you see, this is the core, where you have your L1 and your L2, and the periphery is where you're constantly learning things. Whereas if you learn a first language only at the beginning, then you will learn other aspects of this native language, and you will also have to develop your L2. So they both occupy a different place. And this is what we feel about our native language when we have to use it formally. Every now and then, if you see people or reporters talking to people on the street, they usually misplace the pronouns and they put S's where there aren't S's because they're so tense that they're applying the rules. Conscious. Are you with me? Yes. Okay. Final attainment. You see, if I give you these sentences and I ask you how you feel about them, you have a very clear feeling. Não sempre teve uma pinta aqui. O hotel em cujo eu trabalho. Em que universidade que o João tenha se matriculado impressionou a todos. You can judge that grammatically. You know whether you can say that or not. But when you listen to some of those sentences, they're eating me out of house and home. Who hasn't Bill met the wife of? She washed the soap slippery out of my hands. There seems to his mother to be someone in the room. I couldn't latch the door closed. And my question is, are you pretty much sure about which of these are possible and which of these are just structures that you haven't seen before? You see the difference? In your native language, you can tell, because that sends you back to the core of your language, not to the periphery. So since some structures are related, the child doesn't have to learn one by one. When one is learned, a group of other structures follows naturally. Let me give you an example with one parameter. The child will learn that in English, nouns can pile up. You can say a cleaning cloth, a window cleaning cloth, a car window cleaning cloth, and if I have OCD, the car window cleaning cloth drawer, because I have separate drawers for different kinds of cleaning cloths. So when the child learns that you can pile up nouns in English, the cluster of structures follow or are available to the kid. Phrasal verbs, preposition stranding, double objects, and resultative structures. A little example of each. Phrasal verbs you're pretty familiar with. Preposition stranding, the nice paper the gift was wrapped in, like the possibility of leaving this preposition at the end. Double objects, I gave Mary flowers, which you can't say in Portuguese. Resultative structures, she walked her shoes threadbare. She danced the carpet thin. I can't say ela cozinhou o fogão preto, de tanto que ela cozinhou no fogão ficou preto, ela cozinhou ele preto. The foreign language learner, however, has to acquire these structures separately and one at a time, usually. So food for thought. Knowing the words and understanding what is said doesn't necessarily mean acquisition is taking place. The child learns vocabulary in L2 and hangs it on the skeleton of the native language. That's what happens when your kid has 30 minutes of English every day. So what kind of bilingual speaker will be the result of Brazilian bilingual schools? It depends on the bilingual school that you're sending your kid to. In a regular Brazilian school, parents, teachers, and researchers don't have to worry about L1 acquisition. No parents are worried about sending their kids to a Brazilian school and wondering, will my kid become a native speaker of Brazilian Portuguese? But in English, parents seem to be worried about that. Most of the times, kids produce, at a very early stage, sentences and sentence fragments which clearly show that the language they're building is not English, although it does have English words. Have a bug here. Ai, tem bicho aqui. You see, that's not English. Have a but here, and other things like teachers singing a song with the students. The elephant moves thee slowly, ending an element here that there isn't. Moves thee slowly. and using let's for questions. Let's change our diapers. And you don't use let's for questions. You saying something ne at the end, which is almost like a tick, a verbal tick that comes out in a can. And do we and do poo poo that are inventions that appear in bilingual schools, and that's really not the way you say it in English. So the kids are not exposed to English enough, and that's why have a bug happens, the phenomenon, the have a bug effect. Okay, the kids may be exposed to English, but there is no focus on language development or the kind of input the kids are exposed to. I have 2 minutes. The bilingual environment also has a lot of Portuguese because English is not used around the school premises as a language for communication, but it simply occurs inside the classroom. And kids are so interested in hearing what adults are saying when they're talking to each other. We really need to create an environment where people use the language more naturally and the kids are inserted in this environment. So how can you monitor the have a bug effect? A solid language development-oriented linguistic program to back up the pedagogical plan at the school, because you're following certain, let's say, criteria that are imposed by the government, but this has to be backed up by a linguistic program that has the language acquisition process in the background. The ideal bilingual program includes a language program which receives as much importance as the pedagogical plan. Food for thought, and I'm ending. These are my final considerations. It's imperative that we focus on language development in the bilingual context. I'm talking about the elite schools. After all, the bilingual school children are at the optimal age for language development. I don't mean to advocate that an L2 is not developing unless it is as perfect as it can be. This would be a setback considering the globalized world as it is and the role of the English language in this panorama. But I do believe that it is our duty to present kids with the best possible material from which they can develop enough input, monitored language. The teacher doesn't have to be a native speaker, but there must be someone responsible for making sure that the elephant moves slowly, doesn't happen, and have a bug doesn't go unnoticeably, okay? Depriving the children in the bilingual education context from a good linguistic program is the same as not providing them with the chance to put their most natural abilities in language development to their own advantage. And here I have some references, lots of references. And that's it, thank you.
No, I don't have any slides. And I'm not a bilingual expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I have some personal remarks that I couldn't make on this. And I did remember, this was a long time ago, I actually did write my master's thesis with bilingual children. So I have thought about this in the past. But I come from it from a very personal perspective, a bilingual myself. And you may think that English is one of my 2 languages, but it's not. English is actually my 3rd language. English is by now my best language because I've spent the last 30 years in the States, and that country that you live in tends to sort of overwhelm any other language that you had before that. I grew up in Sweden with a German mother, so I grew up in a completely immersed bilingual environment. And we always had German speakers in the house, so that my parents made sure that I would learn German because Swedish is pretty useless. Only 8 million people speak Swedish, so my parents wanted to make sure I spoke something else. And I have to say, this was in the late 50s, and bilingualism really has come a long way so that we can talk about the scenarios that both of my colleagues here talked about. Those scenarios were not present in the late 50s, early 60s. In fact, when my mother went to the pediatrician and explained to the pediatrician that her child was growing up with 2 languages, the pediatrician yelled at her and said, you are damaging your child. Are you aware of that? Now, my mother was a doctor herself, but she was not a pediatrician. And she, of course, it scared her that she was damaging me, but she also thought, she intuitively knew that this was the right thing to do. And I really have to commend my mother for that. She stood by her guns and she decided that I was going to grow up bilingual. And I was a reluctant bilingual, as are many children. Children do not want to be different. They do not want to speak German in a Swedish-speaking country. I remember going to the store with my mother and being deeply embarrassed when she spoke to me in German. I did not want to be that child. Now, of course, I am ever so grateful for many reasons. So in the 60s, there were a number of linguists, some of them Swedish and quite famous, and you've probably seen them in the literature. They talked about semi-lingualism. How horrible is that? They said if a child grows up bilingual, it actually doesn't end up bilingual, it ends up semi-lingual. It can only do one language properly. And my mother, bless her, she really did not believe in that. She just went right ahead and said, nope, my child is going to be bilingual. So we've really, really come a long ways. I was particularly thrilled in 2012 when I opened up my Sunday New York Times magazine and found an article that talked about the value of bilingualism for any cognitive development. I'm sure you've read the article as well. Google it, New York Times, New York Sunday Times. It's a very easily accessible article, and it's about the value of bilingualism for cognitive development in general. And not only that, there is another bonus. There is some indication that it might help against Alzheimer's and things like that to be bilingual. Yay! Thank you, Mom, for all this. I do not intend to develop Alzheimer's, so I'm working very hard on that. The researcher who did that work was Ellen Bialystok, and it's really, as I said, it's quite accessible. So if you had any doubts after what my esteemed colleagues were saying here, that bilingualism is good for you, Ellen Bialystok will prove to you that it is good for you. And all the things that, or for the children, all the things that we used to say, semi-lingualism, it's not valuable because bilingual children, and I saw this when I worked on my master's thesis, bilingual children in the beginning often lag behind monolingual children. So what would happen, I was working with Swedish mothers in the United States, and they were, of course, surrounded by English, and they were asking me, they were saying, you know, my friend, whose child, of course, is monolingual, she says that her son can do this and this, and my son can't do any of that. He's actually not speaking very much. Well, why is that? Because he's trying to sort out two languages. Of course it's going to take longer. So initially, bilingual children sometimes, not always, but sometimes lag behind monolingual children. And this scares parents, and then they will say, oh, no, I'm not doing this. Forget this second language. We're not going to do this because my child is not developing as fast as the neighbor's child. Well, again, thanks, Mom, for not listening to the pediatrician and for not listening to all those people who said that. That has now been proven is not true. Even if it is a temporary lag, they catch up and develop those cognitive skills that are so valuable. In a sense, you know, I can only look at myself, but you never assume anything about another language if you know at least two. And you know that yourself because most of the people here are now acquired bilinguals. You don't assume, you know, you don't start from that. But in Portuguese, it's like that. So what? There is hundreds of other languages and it works differently in all those languages. And I think bilingual children sort of intuitively know that. And they might expand that knowledge on other cognitive abilities. So that's really very, very gratifying. I did want to comment, I think the scenario that you presented was wonderfully educational for me because I didn't know that Brazil was so, had so much variation in linguistic bilingualism, the different types. And of course, given the size of the country and the history of the country, it's no wonder, but that was very helpful, so thank you for that. And to Marcelo, I also wanted to say, you know, in order for the things that not to happen in the schools that you were observing, the bug problem and the elephant problem, teacher training is the ticket here. That, and this is the true, very true for American bilingual programs as well. The teachers in many of those bilingual programs are not bilingual. They are very dominant in one language, and then you get the sort of issues there. If you are going to be teaching in a bilingual program, the teachers really need to be balanced, and they need to be bilingual in both. So it's all about the teacher training. If they're going to be teaching in an English language school, they need to be absolutely fluent in English, so that we don't have that. They don't have to be native speakers, but they have to be native-like, and they have to not make those kinds of mistakes. Otherwise, those poor parents are paying a lot of money for elephants and bugs, right? Yeah, so that was really a very personal perspective on bilingualism, but I always tell my friends when they're having children, you know, if you have a chance, if you try to go for it, it's the best gift a child can get. Thank you.
We should open up for questions, I guess, if you have any. I see the lady in green had a question. I'll start off. There is a legal requirement that you have a degree in education, because for all that matters, there is no bilingual school in Brazil. We just have preschools, and preschools require that the teachers have a degree in education. But it just so happens this teacher with a degree in education comes to school and is definitely not prepared to handle bilingualism. So yes, teacher training and courses on the side will help you with that, and only that. But yes, in order to start at a school like that, you definitely need a degree in education, because the prefeitura will come to the school, and if you're there and you don't have a degree, it'll give the school hell. So,
How many teachers are there who speak English fluently in order to be speaking to these children all the time?
Few teachers. Few teachers.
Where are we going to go?
Good question.
We work with those teachers and try to help them to get better English.
I mean, it takes a long time to get fluent in English.
Oh, yeah.
I thought the example the professor was saying, I taught my child, my daughter, bilingual. I spoke Portuguese and English to her, and she speaks today fluent English, and she does not have the fluent English that I have, of course, but she speaks English fluently, and she writes really well. I mean, today she's a better translator than I am, because she's in business and I'm not. So that requires a long time. I mean, where are we going to go? Where are we going to end up?
Can I say something about that? I train a lot of teachers, as I said before, and I've just come off a summer, a Northern Hemisphere summer. I get very confused here, with a lot of teachers from different parts of the country, the world actually. And a shocking realization every year, even though I've been doing this for over 20 years, is that those teachers, when they teach English at home, do not speak English in their classrooms. So that's really where we need to start. We need to improve the teachers' English language skills with various ways. I mean, exposure. You know, I grew up in Sweden and I sound like this. I think part of it is because Sweden is a small country. We don't dub our television. We do only English language television in English with subtitles. So I know that that's not feasible in all countries. Then the reason it happened in Sweden is that it's too expensive to dub. So, and that has really benefited the population. Most Swedes don't speak as fluent as I do, but they speak pretty well. And they can certainly, you know, they could teach a class if they were trained as teachers, but their English is certainly good enough to teach a class. So getting the language level up is the first thing, but the second thing is to instill the idea in teachers, in language teachers' heads, that when you teach that language, you speak that language. It has to be the culture of the classroom that it has in that language. And to me, that's a shock every time when I find out that people are not doing that, even though I know it's the case.
I just would like to add, we cannot forget that to work as a teacher in a bilingual school, English, a wonderful English is not enough. So it does make sense to ask for a degree in education, or it should make sense, because you have also to understand about math and other areas and aspects related to kids' education. So it does make sense. But it doesn't mean anything, actually, if we think of our reality, because only having a degree in education doesn't solve our problem. But only speaking English wonderfully doesn't solve our problem as well. So we need to balance. So I do think you should study education.
Some schools will be likely to hire you if you're already taking it. You can do it online, but
I was a teacher, but it was like, it was against law. Another teacher signed the paper for me. But so I have experience. I was a kindergarten teacher, but now it's real, what's the problem?
yeah, because if Prefeitura comes by, they're going to have to throw you out the window.
So I have the experience, but I don't have the degree. So this is the point.
Do you know, sometimes, well, we have as, if we think only about speaking a language well, what for sure is really important, is fundamental. We may think that taking education is not that important, but it is important as well, do you know? So even having experience and everything, I always think that we learn new things, do you know?
That's right.
Yeah, it does make sense.
The preschools. Yeah, the schools are run according to RCN, which is the official document that tells you what kids have to learn. It's similar to your PCN for middle school and stuff. So referenciais curriculares nacionais for preschools, para educação infantil. And there are a number of things that it'll talk about, and it makes sense if you are an educator. So there's that. In other words, in order to be a bilingual school teacher, you have to invest a lot in yourself and understand that your salary is not going to be this, you know, as good as your investment in yourself. But
life
it's a
is not
shame,
fair.
but it's true. And if you go to a good school, this school will have a program for you, a linguistic program. It'll have a developmental program for you. Teacher trainings and different lectures and things that they will bring people in to help you with your knowledge in general.
Yes. I mean, how do you see in terms of cultural identity? Because we know there is like Canadian English, there is Indian English because of the, not only the accent they have, but also because the way they behave and so and so. So I know you were talking about someone who speaks English very well, but what do you mean by that? Are you excluding the child cultural identity?
Because it's there's identity.
Yeah, do you know that this is my field of study? And I think that's why I think it's very difficult to answer because it's not that simple. Your question is what kind of children are we producing in these schools, or you are talking about the teachers?
No, I mean the children. They are learning the language.
Okay.
You said it's important that the teacher speaks English very well,
Mm.
learning the culture of the language. But since we are in Brazil,
Yeah.
they need English here. Well, they need Portuguese as well. They can go abroad some way.
Mm.
What I mean is that are you excluding the child, the cultural identity? The way
Yeah.
people speak in Brazil is different from the way people
Yeah.
speak English in America and in the United States.
Yeah, but that's what I think. Okay, a very personal answer. If we think of English, what kind of culture are you talking about? Culture from Jamaica, culture from Scotland, culture from what are we talking about? So it's not that simple, because I cannot associate the language to a country, because English is everywhere. In India, there are more people who speak English than in many countries in which English is the native language, if we talk about the small countries. So what culture is that?
And in addition to that, I don't see that as a perfect equation. You have the kid, you have the context, and the result is going to be exactly this. Like, I'm a bilingual. I went to an American school. I learned to read and write in English before I did in Portuguese. And my English is my English. I'm a Brazilian who grew up speaking two languages. I lived abroad and stuff. I go to the States. People can't place my accent anywhere because it's nowhere. They think I'm a native speaker.
Well, it
but
is
they
rather
can't-
American. I'd
Yeah.
say. It's not British.
It's not British at all. But I mean, usually Americans want to place me somewhere. Oh, it's here, it's there. But I don't have that particular accent that'll place me in California or in New York or anywhere else for that matter. It's just my English. I'm not worried about that, you know? And I think that what you're doing with the bilingual education is the problem is, I think it's an issue in Brazil. It's not an issue in a country where people go to school and they learn to speak English. It's not about becoming a native speaker, but it's about being functional in the language. You know, in Brazil, you have to go to a language program, to a language institute in order to develop English. In other countries, like in Europe and other countries, you learn that at school. And then you may go to an English-speaking country for a specific time or for an internship or whatever. But that's not an issue. You know what I mean? I think it's just a school that'll give you English as well.
Yeah, you know, I've heard instead of saying we teach here American British English, we teach English. As we're talking before.
Yeah.
English is spoken like in the whole world, and it doesn't matter if it's American British English.
Sure.
That's English. That's what I mean.
Beata, do you want to add to that?
Well, it's as he explained. We talked about that earlier, just the three of us. But the issue of what dialect, that was an issue maybe 20 years ago. You know, people were very particular about, are you teaching British English or do you speak American English, or what is your preference? Today, that doesn't seem to matter. I mean, some people speak some middle Atlantic version of English that could not really be placed anywhere. Yes, we do sound more American than British, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, I call it airport English because it's that sort of neutral English that, you know, please go to gate 23, and that could be anything, you know. And that's really what it is about now. It's about the language. It's not so much about the culture anymore, because we don't talk about, you know, so Scotland and kilts and whiskey and all that, that's fun, but that's not the English language. That's a very small part of the world's very particular culture. That's probably not going to help us acquire English. And I think people have abandoned that concept. So we're teaching children to become global citizens and to use English as one of the means to do so, because English is a lingua franca. But I don't think we're teaching them to be British or American or Canadian or anything.
And sorry.
I would like to add to that. I mean, we're talking here about elite. Go to a public school. There's nothing being taught.
Yeah.
Sorry to say that, but we're here talking about
Yeah.
upper West, upper English, upper teaching. At our public schools, there's nothing being taught. I mean,
not talking about English, but basically what we understand here is English. I've been a teacher at high schools and elementary schools. You can't teach because there's no way to teach. I mean, sorry, I'm being ready about that. What are we talking about here?
Aren't we all?
Yeah, yeah. So, we're lucky. We're talking about people who have money to pay, people who've been to good schools. The issue goes beyond that. I mean,
It does.
what are we going to do? As a teacher, I've been through all levels. I see young teachers here. What are we going to do? That's my main question. I mean, how are we going to teach our nation to speak English? I mean, English could be.
Well, I guess we're doing our part. We're doing what we can. Yeah, it is. It has already become a global language. I particularly don't believe that Chinese is going to take over as people's language. And I like to think English is going to go on for a long time. Guys, we have the conversation is really nice, but I think we're going to have to. We have time for one more question.
1 second. It's practical. Okay. Is there any way we can have access to those presentations in PDF? Because there's so much reference and theoretical issues, and I don't know if you guys feel it, but sometimes I have kind of a hunger to read something of it. But there's no, and I open Google and say, what do I do now?
My presentation is actually an article. I don't know if I can send, does EF have, can I send it to you and we'll pass it on to them? We can send this to them and the references are all there. And there's my email. You can always contact me. We're available for that. But I'll send you and Megali will send hers too. We have articles on that. Mine is an article. So guys, thank you. And maybe Luciano would like to. Thank you very much.
Congratulations. I will keep thinking about these chats that you guys had. I think it was very inspiring, very personal, and also very interesting thoughts from each of you. So thank you so much. I will ask Camila to come in the front. And before Camila takes your name tag so we can find out the winner, I would like you all to give a cheer of applause to Camila, without this event wouldn't be possible. So Camila, thank you so much. So name tags will be available after the draw. Shanam. I let Dr. Beata do the lucky draw. Da-da-da-da-da-dum. And
There is.
wow, congratulations. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Megali. Thanks, Beata, for this session. Thank you all for being here until so late. We have teachers from all parts of Brazil here, most of parts of Brazil here. So it's really nice. For all of you that have been following us online, thank you for being with us until now as well. Also, the notes and the presentations, as the presenters have said, will be distributed in our website, and also thank you, email. Once more, thank you so much for coming.